Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Tuesday, February 14th, 2023. It's about 4:55 in the afternoon here on the East Coast of the United States. What a head scratcher. The American government still insisting publicly that Ukraine is winning, that Ukraine will win the war against Russia, that Russia is defeated, that Putin has led the Russian military into a catastrophic defeat. We're going to run some clips for you. We're going to run Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin talking about all the help we've been providing to the Ukrainians. And then you'll see Secretary General Stoltenberg of NATO pretty much, but not directly, contradicting what Secretary of State Austin has done. Now, they're all together. Secretary General Stoltenberg is in Brussels. General Milley, who is the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, is in Brussels. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, Secretary of Defense, is in Brussels. General Milley and Secretary Austin are physically together in the same room. Secretary General Stoltenberg made his statement yesterday, also in Brussels. But this is the nonsense that Colonel Doug McGregor and Scott Ritter have discussed on this platform, whereby the leaders of the American public are feeding us with garbage, leading us to believe that it is right and proper for the American public to be spending $100 billion of borrowed money, half of which President Biden has already spent in military equipment and in cash, in a losing cause. In a cause that does nothing but extend the war, cause more deaths of conscripts in Russia, Russian conscripts who are in Ukraine, and Ukrainian conscripts who are fighting against them. Like almost all wars, it's an old man's war, but young men die for it. So young Russian and young Ukrainian conscripts are the ones who are dying because President Zelensky can't see the obvious, and because President Putin is taking longer to achieve his goals than he thought, and because the Americans and some NATO countries, you're going to hear some nonsense about how united NATO is. Only 3 of the 35 NATO countries have supplied, 5 of the 35 NATO countries have supplied military equipment. And the little that they have supplied has accomplished only the extension of the war. You've heard me say this. Now you're going to see contradictions coming out of the mouths of these government officials. First is Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin just a few hours ago in Brussels.
Ukraine has been at this for a year, and so they have used a lot of artillery ammunition. We're going to do everything we can, working with our international partners, to ensure that we get them as much ammunition as quickly as possible.
As much ammunition as quickly as possible. Pretty much the same thing that President Joe Biden has said, and that Secretary Austin's colleague, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, has said. Here's what the Secretary General of NATO, who was in the same room but didn't speak at the same time as Secretary Austin and General Milley in a minute. Here's what the Secretary General Stoltenberg had to say about the rate at which the Ukrainian military is using arms and the rate at which the West can resupply what's being used. Take a look.
The war in Ukraine is consuming an enormous amount of ammunition and depleting Allied stockpiles. The current rate of Ukraine's ammunition expenditure is many times higher than our current rate of production. This puts our defense industries under strain.
2 key points here. 1, depleting our supplies. Remember, my dear friends, we know that NATO, and particularly the United States, is not supplying from surplus, but from substance. The weapons that NATO has sent south to Ukraine, the weapons that the United States has sent east to Ukraine are not from surplus. They're from substance that the United States intended to use for its own defense, if God forbid it's necessary, or that the United States and NATO intended to use for its own defense, should that be necessary. And when General Stoltenberg says that our supplies are being depleted, it's not surplus supplies, it's substantive supplies. Who else knows that? Vladimir Putin. Second point I want to make is that General Stoltenberg, we're going to run him again in a minute because I want you to make sure you agree with my characterization of what he said. Ukraine military is using many times what we can supply. So if we use round numbers, if the Ukraine military is using 100 rounds of artillery ammunition, 100 artillery shells in an hour, NATO can only supply what? 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. He said they're using many times. So it's got to be more than twice as much. So if we're supplying 25 every time they use 100, pretty soon they're going to run out and we're going to run out. And is that the situation we want to find ourselves in? Gary, run Secretary General Stoltenberg one more time.
The war in Ukraine is consuming an enormous amount of ammunition and depleting Allied stockpiles. The current rate of Ukraine's ammunition expenditure is many times higher than our current rate of production. This puts our defense industries under strain.
That's putting it mildly, that this puts our defense industries under strain. So to underscore again, 2 points. Depleting our stockpiles, not surplus stockpiles, but substantive stockpiles. And the Ukrainians who are losing the war, although you're going to hear a different version of that in a moment, are using many times what we can supply them with. The we to whom he refers are the few countries in NATO willing to supply material. That's Poland, Romania, Great Britain, France, Germany, and the United States. 6. I misspoke when I said 5. Here's General Miley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who, as you'll see, was standing next to Secretary of State Austin when Secretary of Defense Austin when the Defense Secretary made his statement. But listen to General Miley claiming Russia's lost.
NATO and this coalition has never been stronger, and Russia is now a global pariah, and the world remains inspired by Ukrainian bravery and resilience. In short, Russia has lost. They've lost strategically, operationally, and tactically, and they are paying an enormous price on the battlefield.
He doesn't believe a word of that. We know he doesn't believe a word of that because 2 months ago he said the exact opposite until he was chastised by the White House and told to say something consistent with the Joe Biden message. Joe Biden wants war. Joe Biden and the people around him, not General Miley, although he's being co-opted today because he knows how horrible war is. The traditional opponents of war are the military guys and gals that have been through war. Joe Biden and the people around him want war. They want to drag you to war. They want to drag me to war. They don't expect you and me physically to be there in war, but they want to drag the country into war. He has a failing presidency domestically, and when all else fails, they take you to war. They are forcing General Miley to utter what he knows is not true. You know from listening to Colonel McGregor, you know from listening to Scott Ritter, people with extraordinary contacts in the battlefield and people with extraordinary courage who are not beholden to the Defense Department have said, and that is that Ukraine has lost. Putin has taken close to 2/3 of the territory that he is determined to take. If you saw Judging Freedom earlier, if you haven't, you can get it because it's all posted. The Ukrainian military is drafting boys in high school and sending them to the front lines. It is a disgrace for the senior military officer of the United States to tell the public, the American public and the world, something that he knows is not true. So tomorrow, when Colonel McGregor is on with us, 3 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern time, we will run these clips and you'll get his sophisticated analysis. But for now, hold your judgment on these guys. They're not telling you the truth. General Stoltenberg is telling you the truth. Colonel McGregor is telling you the truth. Putin may be a butcher, maybe a horrible person, maybe a dictator. It's probably all three. But he's about to triumph in this war because the Ukrainians do not have the wherewithal with which to fight back. And NATO is reluctant to supply them with what they need because NATO is smart enough to know what Joe Biden doesn't. And that is World War III today would be untenable. More as we get it. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.